In this episode of the Encounter Report, 3 brave soldiers battle against the evil of math in the Legend of Dragoon. There's Axelrod, your forgetful narrator and villain sympathizer who did a not blind playthrough on the PlayStation 3. Then there's Crayson, the random encounter marathon runner extraordinaire who played the game blind on an emulator. Rounding out the roster is Ryoshin, the foremost grinding expert on everything there is to know about grinding who did a not blind playthrough on an emulator. Now that we have all the information out there, let's resume our siege on Subtraction. We've got battle types up first, and one realization that nobody ever seems to talk about is how much time battles take. It was something I never seemed to notice, but now that we're here, my goodness, our battle's pretty lengthy. Each one of us had less than 300 random encounters, and that amounted to 6 to 7 hours. On top of that, our encounter time percentage leans into boss fights, which is a pretty big anomaly. Somehow, 8 to 10% of all encounters that took place for our playthroughs took 43 to 52% of all the time spent in them, which was a majority share for each of us. Those fights really were time-consuming. For battle locations, I found myself surprised at how little influence world map encounters actually had, and definitely thought the numbers would be bigger. What was funny to witness was the conspiracy theories when reaching an encounter right before the exit or an entrance to something. Ryoshin in particular had some choice words. Next up are combat types, and I was really drawn to how many deaths we had across the game. For myself, I died to Grand Jewel, Divine Dragon, and Polter, which was the Helm, Armor, and Sword optional boss. Crayson died to an optional fight on the Phantom Ship, Lloyd in Flanville Tower, and 2 Melbu Frama attempts. Ryoshin's deaths were to the Divine Dragon, Polter, and 2 Magician Faust attempts. He thought he could beat him without the Legend Cask and was quickly put in his place. Faust don't play no game. We're flying past subtypes since things are quite tame. There's 3 tutorial fights in the game for learning to battle, learning to use items, and learning to Dragoon, and they don't count in any way, shape, or form. Crayson grinded Rose's Dragoon editions, and Ryoshin grinded to reduce his Dragoon SP before a boss fight. Notable boss fights is substituting in for notable locations, and the first one is the Linus fight, which is one of the hardest, if not the hardest fight in the game thanks to her spellcasting. Ryoshin absolutely destroyed the fight with little to no resistance, while Crayson and myself had quite a bit of a hard time. For myself, I was quite unlucky, being the only person for Linus to take 4 consecutive turns against, which really set me back. Crayson, on the other hand, might have had the most amount of luck. With Linus in the yellow HP threshold, Dart was at 55 HP, Rose at 142, and Meru at 357. He had no recovery items in his inventory except 1 Angel's Prayer and a recovery ball, and he throws out the recovery ball, which nets him a healing rain. That propels him long enough to beat Linus with just Meru alive. If that ain't a close call, I don't know what is. Everyone's favorite fight, Grand Jewel, steps up to the plate, and this one was as much of a struggle as everyone suspected it would be. I had a rough death after 28 minutes of hacking away at the boss, while Crayson let Meru do much of the heavy lifting. Ryoshin, on the other hand, decided to leverage his knowledge of the game to his advantage and grinded his Dragoon levels down prior to the fight, allowing him to transform every couple of turns. Melbu Frama rounds out the notable boss fights and is certainly one for the record books. Without a doubt, one of the longest fights in JRPG history, we all took our sweet time trying to overcome this challenge. In my fight, I was able to effectively go full offense, only having to guard 3 times on Meru and basically just bullied my way through it. Crayson, on the other hand, had a heartbreaking death on his first attempt, which lasted 1 hour, 42 minutes, and 34 seconds, after getting a couple nasty spellcast sequences in the final phase. On his next attempt, he unfortunately had another heartbreaking death after 54 minutes 33 seconds, as he was likely only a few hits away from victory. We all know Crayson though. He knows how to channel victory through his fingertips, and he managed to take the boss down on his 3rd attempt, which lasted 55 minutes 21 seconds. Ryoshin did what he does best and mowed through the boss like it was nothing. Having bested all the optional bosses, which includes Magician Faust, his party had very little to fear. He effectively went full offense on Dart and Hashel, while Meru sat on the sidelines waiting to throw items or healing spells where needed. It was a great display of knowledge and execution, and Melbu Frama didn't stand a chance. It's time to grab those reading glasses because here's the party composition stats. For the Legend of Dragoon, it had a whopping 9 characters total, but only 3 available inside encounters. My party ended up with Dart, Hashel, and Meru, although Albert remained a boss killer for many encounters. Grayson's party consisted of Dart and Meru. Rose was around, but she spent so much time dead she really had a hard time contributing in many fights. Ryoshin ran with Dart, Haschel, and Meru, although he took a more well-rounded approach and tried to utilize everyone to some degree, except Miranda. Nobody really wants to spend time making her good. Following party composition is Combat Actions, a mostly game-specific stat designed for one thing only: bragging rights. So here's each character's addition stats, solely for Grayson, myself, and Ryoshin to flex on one another, but perhaps for your amusement as well. I'm just going to cycle through these since there are 9 characters to go through, so I encourage you to pause, but here's a couple definitions and clarifications. For the Dragoon stats, total encounters is showing how many times that character transformed into a Dragoon. However, in the case of specials, if that character did not initiate the special command, I did not count it. While on the topic of the special command, it was used far less than I thought it would be. I used it a grand total of 12 times, with Dart and Haschel being tied at 5 for the most used. Grayson used it 13 times, with Rose being at 6 and Dart at 4. Ryoshin used it 5 times, with Dart and Rose at 2. For guard, that's how many times the character guarded, but does not count guards used under the confused status effect. This is a really good metric to see how defensive everyone was and with which characters. Dart had the advantage of being around for the vast majority of the fights and thus needed to guard more. Meru, on the other hand, was just incredibly squishy. Despite being one of the last characters to get, she certainly needed to spend a lot of time being defensive. Speaking of Meru, we're going to take a brief pause on her information since everyone had her in their final party to point out some cool strategy differences. For my playthrough, I value damage above all, and Meru does very little of it, so you can see that reflected in my cool boogie stats. Grayson, on the other hand, valued SP gain above all. Once he acquired cool boogie after the Divine Dragon fight, he only swapped off of it once. Since Ryoshin spread out his character usage, his numbers turned out to be more uniform and he ended on cool boogie just because it was the next addition in line, but he too valued the SP gain just to a lesser degree. Our different approaches to fights was pretty cool and it was neat to see our strategies manifest. The final combined stats are here to take us home, and one thing I haven't touched on much yet, but found pretty fascinating, is the blind versus not blind playthrough. Grayson was the only person amongst us to have played the game blind, and you can't really see it here. He spent more than 3 hours on the final boss and had some unfortunate mishaps go his way, but overall his numbers aren't that far off. Remember that boss fights in The Legend of Dragoon take a really long time, and may have the highest averages we will ever see for the encounter report. I averaged 1 minute 30 seconds for random encounters and 12 minutes 57 seconds for bosses. Grayson averaged 1 minute 20 seconds for random encounters and 19 minutes 36 seconds for bosses, while Ryoshin had 1 minute 26 seconds for random encounters and 10 minutes 43 seconds for bosses. When looking back at boss averages for other games, these numbers are double, while in some cases 5 times higher than prior games in the encounter report. And that marks the end of the Legend of Dragoon Encounter Report. I hope you visit everyone's channels and social media to praise them for all this wonderful data. With another report done, I suppose we can finally enroll in Lavitz's Slambology 101 class and learn all there is to know about the Slambert. Thanks for watching, appreciate it, see you in the next video.